Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This isn't quite a breaking news update. It's a story that has been emerging over the last couple of days concerning the attempts by the Trump administration, I think, to distract from the problematic Epstein files. And they are trying to scrabble around to find stories that will take away the focus of the media from Epstein, the Epstein files, to something else. And there was this claim that Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, had found these burn bags in a secret room. You know, just now, how lucky! Are almost a decade after they happened. It happens across this room in the FBI headquarters where there are bags full of stuff that's due to be burnt but hasn't been burnt. And then in there are these smoking gun documents that insinuate that Hillary Clinton and Democrats in general had been trying to insinuate that Trump was connected to Russia, but that wasn't the case, and this was all just a plan from the Democrats. And Kash Patel claimed he had found these documents, and then there were some claims about emails as well associated with this that have since been found to be Russian productions. Like these documents, so-called documents, have ended up kind of showing almost the opposite of what they were claimed from people like Patel. So this is we're going to go and look at two different articles, a New York Times one and this one, a Rolling Stone article. Declassified, MAGA's new Russiagate evidence, scare quotes, evidence was likely made up by the Kremlin. The administration's latest attempt to distract from the Epstein scandal debunks a key part of their Russia investigation narrative. I'm going to pretty much read most of this article as I think it gives a good summary, and then we'll look at a couple of pertinent parts. Well, actually, we'll start with the end of the New York Times article, which itself is called Clinton Plan Emails Were Likely Made by Russian Spies, Declassified Report Shows. An annex to a report by the Special Counsel John H. Durham was the latest in a series of disclosures about the Russia inquiry as the Trump team seeks to distract from the Jeffrey Epstein files. So you've had all sorts talking about this. Caroline Levitt and many Republicans shouting about how this is kind of smoking gun and whatnot. You need to understand who John Durham was. So, after the special counsel investigating Trump's campaign's ties to Russia, Robert S. Mueller III, issued his final report, the Attorney General at the time, William P. Barr, assigned Mr. Durham to hunt for evidence proving Mr. Trump's conspiracy theory that the investigation had stemmed from a deep state plot against him. In 2020, as the New York Times had reported, after Mr. Durham failed to find evidence of intelligence abuses, he shifted to instead trying to find a basis to blame the Clinton campaign for the fact that Mr. Trump's campaign had come under suspicion of colluding with Russia. Mr. Durham was never able to prove any Clinton campaign conspiracy to frame Mr. Trump by spreading information that it knew to be false about his ties to Russia, but he nevertheless used court filings in his final report to insinuate such suspicions. He brought charges of false statements against two people involved in outside efforts to scrutinize possible ties between Mr. Trump and Russia, both of which ended in quick acquittals. So here we have this guy, Mr. Durham, who was a pro-Trump guy assigned by Trump's Attorney General to show that this was a sort of a Clinton thing. Now, if he knew that and had the evidence, he would have, it wouldn't have put that evidence in burn bags to remain silent until someone like Cash Patel happened upon them, right? His whole raison d'etre was to find the smoking gun evidence, and if this is smoking gun evidence, he would have told you about it. So, like, the whole premise to this scenario is bizarre. Anyway, we'll go back to the Rolling Stones article. Rolling Stone article. Donald Trump and his allies are throwing every bucket of chum they can at their base in the ongoing efforts to distract from the administration's bungling of the Jeffrey Epstein case. And this time, they may have caught a fish that's too big to fry. Following a request from Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, the FBI and DOJ agreed to declassify the so-called Durham Annex, a 29-page appendix to the Durham report. The annex was made public on Thursday, with FBI Director Kash Patel claiming it was part of a hidden trove of documents, quote, buried in a back room of the FBI that contained classified, quote, evidence that the Clinton campaign plotted to frame President Trump and fabricate the Russian collusion hoax, end quote. It contained no such evidence, but that didn't matter to the Trump allies desperate to cast prominent Democratic figures as anti-American criminals. The original Durham report was released by Trump-appointed special counsel John Durham in 2023 and examined the evidence underlying the federal investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Durham was unable to find proof that the FBI or other government entities engaged in prosecutable misconduct targeting Trump. The president and his allies have nevertheless continued to try, and fail to prove Democratic misconduct related to the investigation, while alleging Barack Obama and others should be indicted for treason over the hoax. MAGA Republicans immediately seized on the newly released annex as a smoking gun that proved their allegations. Following the release of the annex on Thursday, the New York Post ran with the headline, quote, read the documents that prove Hillary Clinton okayed plan to smear Trump with Russia collusion. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters that the documents were, quote, further evidence that Hillary Clinton approved the Russia hoax against POTUS, and the FBI and the CIA were both weaponized to accelerate this hoax. But of course, and this is me now, the reality is that John Durham couldn't find that proof before, and so that he would have a bunch of documents to be burnt that actually do prove this is just utterly ridiculous. John Solomon, another longtime Trump ally, to return to the article, wrote on X that there is a, quote, is smoking gun evidence inside the Durham Annex. If it is authenticated by further investigation, it means liberal mega donor George Soros' team knew the whole Clinton plan for the Russiagate hoax. Now, it's worth reminding ourselves that George Soros is the bogeyman of the conservative right in America and has been for some time. And that kind of originates from him being a liberal Jew in Hungary, and Viktor Orban has seen him as a bogeyman, and the Russians too. And actually, when you look at it, that's been an imported piece of ideology from these pro-Russian um, entities in Eastern Europe and in Russia. Viktor Orban is the darling, or certainly was the darling, of the conservative right. CPAC conferences have taken place in Budapest, and he has had the red carpet rolled out quite literally for him at Mar-a-Lago by Donald Trump. So Viktor Orban is adored by these types. Um, we know that Tucker Carlson is a big fan, but his father, Tucker Carlson's father, is on the board of directors for the lobbying company who lobbies for Viktor Orban. So the whole connection between the American right and the conservative right in Hungary is very well established, and you can make those connections then back to Russia. And there is an element of the MAGA right who really do not have a problem with Russia, and there is, I think, an issue there, and I think there is compromise there, and actually, this kind of shows it. So anyway, but George Soros is going to be the obvious vehicle for disinformation, I think, coming from pro-Russian sources. So Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican in Iowa, wrote in a statement that these intelligence reports and related records, whether true or false, were buried for years, and in his view contained proof that, quote, the Obama FBI failed to adequately review and investigate intelligence reports showing the Clinton campaign may have been ginning up the fake Trump Russia narrative for Clinton's political gain, which was ultimately done through the Steele dossier and other means. End quote. In reality, the previously classified documents seem to suggest that some of the supposed evidence, scare quotes, evidence, Patel and others are touting as proof of their conspiracies was actually fabricated by Russian intelligence. Amid heavy redactions, the annex states that two emails supposedly written by individuals working for billionaire George Soros's Open Society Foundation suggesting that Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign was interested in carrying out plans to, quote, demonize Putin and Trump were, quote, ultimately a composite of several emails that were obtained through Russian intelligence, hacking, of the US-based think tanks, including the Open Society Foundations and the Carnegie Endowment and others. Durham's assessment is that the emails were likely Frankenstein fabrications and thus not authentic, and that's coming from John Durham himself. So again, we're left with like what new evidence show that no one knows about shows that there's a smoking gun here. Well, the answer is that there isn't that evidence. The article continues, the misguided right-wing reaction to the annex tracks with the ultimate idea behind the Durham investigation. As previously reported by the New York Times, the more than 3 years at Durham at the direction of Trump's Justice Department spent trying to find evidence of criminal wrongdoing against the president eventually turned into a fishing expedition against the Clinton campaign. In the face of growing scandal over his relationship with Epstein and his administration's refusal to release evidence and documents related to the dead sex offenders case, Trump is trying to redirect his base's attention to the nearly decade-old Russia investigation. Bringing up Obama, Clinton, and supposed deep state plots is usually a reliable method to bury stories he'd rather not have under public scrutiny, even if nothing ever comes of it. Quote, it's another ticking time bomb for himself, a Trump advisor recently told Rolling Stone of Trump's recent push to have Obama and other prominent Democrats prosecuted. Quote, we are promising them, the base, that these people committed the crime of the century and that Dems are going down for this. What if we don't take them down? It'll be a broken promise. The problem is, I just don't think the MAGA base have a particularly long memory. They end up not really caring if things don't come about. It's just throw anything against the wall that you possibly can and see what sticks. And that which doesn't stick and falls down disastrously isn't really a disaster because hey, no one really cares. No one really like this. This goes back to some of the rationalization for Epstein's behavior that you're starting to see, and the idea that Ghislaine Maxwell is now uh, in a minimum security prison, that she's been moved quietly from her prison to one where she has a much better life now, and who knows, may even end up getting pardoned because hey, it's not really about the content. It's not really about the morality of the Epstein files and the whole scenario. It's about doing one over the other side, and that's what this is about as well. Okay, so we're going to go back to the New York Times. Just look at a little piece of the evidence here, and I talked about this the other day with regard to uh, the the excerpt from Pod Save America, where they were talking about this, and the email that had a phrase that actually only really made sense in Russian when you translate it back into Russian. Although to mention it here, I'll throw that in when we get there. So the annex, so this is the Durham annex, shows that the person who supposedly sent the July 27th email, Leonard Bernardo of the Open Society Foundation's network, told Mr. Durham in 2021 that he had never seen the message and did not write it. The network is the philanthropic arm of the liberal financier George Soros, who has been made out to be a villain by Russian state media and by some American conservatives. The annex also cited a purported email from July the 25th, 2016, also attributed to Mr. Bernardo, referring to President Vladimir Putin of Russia. The message claimed that a Clinton advisor was proposing a plan, quote, to demonize Putin and Trump, adding, quote, later the FBI will put more oil on the fire. Now, although it doesn't go into the details here, we don't say put oil on the fire. You say put fuel on the fire, gasoline on the fire, but you don't say put oil on the fire. I know that's only a little thing, but actually, when you translate that back into Russian, that's what the Russians say, and so therefore, it looks very much like this could well have some Russian fingerprints. This is on it. This is very similar to the Seymour Hersh article that he wrote concerning the Nord Stream pipeline explosions, where he was blaming like the Norwegians and the Americans end up being a load of rubbish, but loads of people took it really seriously. He was saying he was getting one of his sources was an American intelligence operative or whatever, and one of the statements that came from his supposed source there was a phrase that doesn't make sense in English at all. Uh, in fact, I'm going to find that for you now just to give you a sense of what's going on. So here's the famous Seymour Hersh and his Substack. This is his article, Opera Buffer in Ukraine. And we're going to look at a part down here. Yeah, here it is. Uh, that is using his intelligence official. Uh, the officials said there was a lot more than grain and sunflower seeds flowing into Europe from Odessa and other Black Sea ports. Quote, Odessa's exports included illegal stuff like drugs and the oil that Ukraine was getting from Russia. So it's just completely insinuating that Ukraine is doing loads of dodgy stuff. At this point, with the Ukrainian counteroffensive against Russia thwarted, the official said, quote, Zelensky has no plan except to hang on. It's as if he's an orphan, a poor waif in his underwear, and we have no real idea of what Zelensky and his crowd are thinking. Ukraine is the most corrupt and dumbest government in the world outside of Nigeria, and Biden's support of Zelensky can only come from Zelensky's knowledge of Biden, and not just because he was taking care of Biden's son. Right. So, just the idea that American intelligence official would say this is ridiculous because, first of all, it's as if he's an orphan, a poor waif in his underwear, is a Russian phrase, right? And so that's just been directly translated, and this tells you that his source is Russian. If this source is not an American, and an American in the intelligence community would never say Ukraine is the most corrupt and dumbest government in the world outside of Nigeria. That is just never going to be something an American official actually says. So, you know, you look at some of the phrases, words are really important. I always say this. You look at some of the phrases and you're like, okay, I don't trust your sources. You're being handled by a Russian here, and you're coming out with real pro-Russian articles. And that's really bad. And here we have art emails that are spliced together and created these Frankenstein emails that are created with, and this was apparently an extra sentence that were added on that wasn't in another email or something like that, as far as I could work out from what the Pod Save America was saying. That particular sentence about putting more oil on the fire, and again, oil is just the wrong word to use there. Is there an addition that just shows that, I think, or doesn't 100% show, but it leaves one thinking it might have a bit of Russian, there might be some Russian fingerprints on this. That message identified the advisor as Julie, while the July 27th one said Julia. An accompanying Russian intelligence memo identified the aide as Julianne Smith, foreign policy advisor for the Clinton campaign who worked at the Center for a New American Security. But the trove of Russian files contained two different versions of the July 25th message, one that somehow had an additional sentence, and Mr. Bernardo denied sending it, telling Mr. Durham's team that he did not know who Julie was and would not use a phrase like "put more oil into the fire." Again, yeah, put more oil into the fire is not the way that we would phrase that. Ms. Smith informed Mr. Durham in 2021 that she had no memory of proposing anything to campaign leadership about attacking Mr. Trump over Russia, although she, quote, recalled conversations with others in the campaign expressing their genuine concerns that the DNC hack was a threat to the electoral system and that Trump and his advisors appeared to have troubling ties to Russia. The annex also shows that Mr. Durham obtained emails from several liberal-leaning think tanks mentioned in the Russian memos and did not find copies of the messages supposedly written by Mr. Bernardo. The think tank included the Open Society Foundations, the Atlantic Council, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the Center for New American Security. But Mr. Durham found other emails, attachments, and documents that contain language and references with the exact same or similar verbiage to those messages. Those included the July 25th email by the Carnegie Endowment cyber expert that contained an extensive passage about Russian hacking that was echoed verbatim in the purported July the 25th message attributed to Mr. Bernardo. In other words, they've taken that verbatim out of another email and whacked it in, supposedly from Mr. Bernardo, thrown in a couple of sentences, some that look like they've got Russian origin, and then said, look, here's a smoking gun. And even Mr. Durham, John Durham at the time, was like, yeah, these look a bit dodge, and hence why they weren't published. And now, however many years later, in some burn bags, these are found, and someone like Cash Patel saying, "Yay, this is a smoking gun." Well, actually, no, it's not, and they are likely, which is intelligence speak. Uh, they are likely made by Russian spies. So don't be fooled by what the Trump administration is trying to do in distract you away from the Epstein story. it is a big story, and it should be a big story. And what he's doing with the Ghislaine Maxwell looks dodgy as you like. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.